3 sacred texts, 3 ancient civilizations, 1 small wooden box said to carry the presence of God himself. And yet, when the greatest empire of its age burned Jerusalem to the ground, the one object everyone expected to find simply wasn't there. There was no trial, no confession, no confirmed grave. For nearly 3,000 years, it has never resurfaced. At the exact moment, all 3 of the world's major monotheistic traditions say it mattered most. Most documentaries ask you one question about the Ark of the Covenant. What was inside it? That question has already been answered many times over, and it isn't the most interesting one.
The real question is stranger.
Why does an object this important vanish so completely that even the people who wrote about it couldn't agree on what happened next? And why, when modern archaeologists dig into the very ground where the kingdom that built it was supposed to stand, do they find far less than the story promises? This is the Ark of the Covenant, told through the Torah, the Bible, the Qur'an, and the archaeologist's trowel. According to the Book of Exodus, the Ark was a chest of acacia wood, roughly a meter long. It was plated inside and out with gold, with 2 winged cherubim facing each other on its lid.
That lid had its own name, the mercy seat.
Inside, tradition says, were the 2 stone tablets of the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. But the Ark was never just a container. In ancient Israelite theology, it functioned as God's footstool on earth, while heaven remained his throne. It sat in the most restricted space imaginable, the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest could enter, only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. There's a linguistic detail worth pausing on. The Qur'an uses the same word, tabut, for this object and for the basket that carried the infant Moses down the Nile. 2 very different objects, one shared word, tying Islamic and Hebrew tradition back to a common root. 3 traditions are about to tell 3 very different chapters of this same story. It starts with the one where the Ark stops being sacred furniture and becomes something closer to a weapon. Before it ever rested quietly in a temple, the Ark was a weapon of terror on the battlefield. And its first outing in the biblical account nearly ends the entire story before it starts. At the crossing of the Jordan River, the waters are said to part as priests carrying the Ark step in. At Jericho, it's carried around the city walls for 7 days straight, and on the 7th day, the walls collapse. Generations later, the Israelites make a dangerous assumption. Losing a battle against the Philistines, they decide to bring the Ark itself onto the battlefield. They're treating it less like a sacred symbol and more like a good luck charm they can deploy on command.
It doesn't work.
The Israelites are routed, and for the only time in its recorded history, the Ark is captured by an enemy army. What happens next is one of the most cinematic episodes in the entire Hebrew Bible, and almost no English-language documentary tells it. The Philistines carry the Ark into the temple of their god, Dagon, and place it beside his statue. A calculated insult. Their god enthroned beside Israel's captured god. The next morning, the statue of Dagon is found face down on the ground in front of the Ark. They set it back up. The following morning, it's face down again, this time with its head and hands broken off.
Then the plagues start. Tumors sweep through every city the ark is moved to. The Philistines pass it from town to town, hoping to offload the problem onto their neighbors. And the affliction follows it every time. Within months, they send the ark back to Israel themselves, along with a guilt offering, desperate to be rid of it. The lesson embedded in that story matters for everything that follows. The Bible doesn't present the ark as a magic weapon that guarantees victory just by showing up. It presents it as something closer to a live wire, dangerous to treat carelessly, sacred rather than tactical.
After its return, the ark eventually comes to rest at Shiloh, and later, under King David, it's brought into Jerusalem. It's David's son Solomon who builds the permanent temple, sometime in the 10th century BCE. He places the ark in the innermost sanctuary, beneath the wings of two much larger carved cherubim. And then, almost without warning, the trail goes cold. The last clear textual reference to the ark sitting in its place comes from the account of the temple's dedication under Solomon. After that point, the biblical text simply stops describing where it is. When the Babylonian army destroys Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BCE, looting everything of value, the ark is conspicuously absent from the list of captured treasures. It wasn't recorded as stolen. It wasn't recorded as destroyed. It was simply not there.
Jewish tradition generally holds that the ark disappeared during that Babylonian destruction.
But there are no reliable historical records confirming what actually happened to it after that point. When the Second Temple was built after the Babylonian exile, the ark was never placed inside it.
Ancient Jewish sources describe the Holy of Holies as standing empty. That silence is about to echo across two more religious traditions, in two very different ways. But first, the people who inherited that silence tried hardest of all to fill it in. The Hebrew Bible goes quiet after the Babylonian destruction, but Jewish tradition itself never really stopped talking about the ark. Centuries after the temple fell, rabbinic sources tried to answer the question the Bible left open.
The Mishnah, compiled around 200 CE, records a tradition that King Josiah, ruling roughly a generation before Jerusalem's fall,
sensed the coming destruction and acted first. According to this account, Josiah ordered the ark hidden away inside the temple complex itself, sealed in a chamber built by King Solomon for exactly this purpose. If that tradition is accurate, the ark may never have left Jerusalem at all. It may simply have gone underground, literally, while the city above it burned.
A separate and much older account tells a different version of the same instinct. Hide the ark before disaster strikes. The second book of Maccabees, written around the 2nd century BCE, describes the prophet Jeremiah warned by God of the coming Babylonian invasion. Jeremiah is said to have taken the ark, along with the tent of meeting and the altar of incense, to a mountain and hidden them inside a cave. That mountain is named directly in the text, Nebo, the same peak where Moses is said to have died centuries earlier. When his companions tried to mark the location so it could be found again, Jeremiah told them the site would remain unknown until God gathered his people once more. This is the actual source behind the Mount Nebo tradition, not a vague legend floating through history. It's a specific claim written down in a Jewish text roughly 2 centuries before Christianity even existed. Both traditions, Josiah's hidden chamber and Jeremiah's cave, share the same underlying idea. The ark wasn't lost. It was deliberately put somewhere safe by someone who saw the danger coming. But belief and evidence are different things, and the Jewish historian Josephus makes that gap explicit.
Writing in the 1st century CE, decades after the Second Temple itself was destroyed by Rome, Josephus catalogued the treasures of the First Temple in detail.
When he reaches the ark, his account breaks off. He states plainly that he does not know what became of it. That silence is significant. Josephus had access to temple records, priestly oral tradition, and decades of study, and he still couldn't say where the ark went.
If anyone in the ancient world was positioned to know the answer, it was him. His uncertainty is itself a kind of evidence. These rabbinic and early Jewish traditions never became official doctrine.
Judaism today holds no single unified position on the ark's fate. What they do show is that the silence in the biblical text was never comfortable to the people who inherited it. Jewish scholars spent centuries trying to fill it in. That search for an answer didn't end with Judaism.
It continued in 2 more traditions, each reading the same absence in its own way.
Most Ark documentaries skip this chapter entirely, and it matters.
A story about 3 faiths owes the Christian tradition more than just the Old Testament half of its own scripture.
By the time the New Testament is written, the physical ark has already been missing for centuries. It does not appear as a historical object anywhere in the Gospels or the letters of Paul. But it makes one striking reappearance in the final book of the Christian Bible, Revelation. In a vision near the climax of the book, the author describes the temple of God opening in heaven and the ark of his covenant appearing inside it, accompanied by lightning, thunder, and an earthquake. Most Christian traditions read this scene as symbolic, rather than a claim about the ark's physical location on earth. The vision suggests that the earthly ark, whatever became of it, was always a copy of something eternal, and that God's covenant with his people was never actually dependent on a wooden box surviving in a specific city.
Its disappearance, in other words, doesn't undo what it represented.
That idea sets up a bridge into a very different tradition. One where the physical ark comes roaring back into the story, centuries later, in an entirely different part of the world. If you've watched even a handful of ark documentaries, you've probably heard almost nothing about how the Qur'an treats this object. Not because it's absent, because most English language creators never go looking. The account appears in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 248.
The Israelites have asked for a king to lead them into battle.
A prophet among them, understood by classical commentators to be Samuel, speaks to the people. He tells them the sign confirming Talut, known in the Bible as Saul,
as their rightful king, will be the return of the Tabut.
This chest, the verse says, will contain sakina, tranquility or reassurance sent from God. Along with it, a remnant of what was left behind by the family of Moses and the family of Aaron.
And it will be carried by angels. The word sakina is worth pausing on. Classical commentary, most notably from the scholar Ibn Kathir, explains it as a kind of peace sent to steady the hearts of the believers before a difficult war. Ibn Kathir also records an account traced back to the companion Ibn Abbas, describing angels carrying the tabut visibly through the sky until they set it down in front of Talut, in full view of the people. That public, undeniable moment is what convinces the Israelites to accept both Talut's kingship and the prophet's authority. Notice the shift here. This isn't the Exodus story or the temple story. It's a different moment entirely, when the ark reappears as a political and spiritual sign confirming a king. The relics of Moses and Aaron tie it to the same sacred lineage the Bible describes. But here it isn't sitting in a temple, it's deciding a monarchy. 3 chapters of the same object's story, told by 3 different traditions.
The next question is the one modern science has to answer, and it's less comfortable than any of them.
It's tempting to assume that because the Bible describes the ark in such precise detail, that detail alone counts as proof.
Archaeologists are more careful than that. The design does fit its claimed era.
Researchers studying ancient Egyptian ritual furniture, ceremonial boxes, and portable thrones carried on poles have found this exact style of object was common in Egyptian religious life during the Late Bronze Age, roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE. If the ark existed as described, it would have looked exactly like the sacred objects people of that region and era already recognized. But the larger kingdom the Bible says built and housed it is a much shakier claim. Israeli archaeologist Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University has pointed out there is remarkably little physical evidence for a large, unified Israelite kingdom in the 10th century BCE. Of the size and wealth the Bible describes under David and Solomon. His research suggests much of that Golden Age narrative, including the building of Solomon's temple, appears to have been written down centuries later. During the reign of King Josiah in the 7th century BCE, looking back and reconstructing a glorified version of the past. No inscription discovered so far has been universally accepted as directly referring to the ark itself. If the ark was real, why hasn't archaeology found it, or anything like it? The honest answer has less to do with the ark specifically, and more to do with how ancient history survives at all. Much of the Temple Mount cannot be excavated using modern archaeological methods because of its continuing religious and political significance. Objects made of gold and precious metal are exactly the items least likely to survive across 3,000 years. They get looted in wars, melted down for their material, and recast into something else entirely, over and over, by whoever conquers the territory next. The absence of a golden artifact in the archaeological record almost never proves it didn't exist. It usually just proves someone eventually needed the gold more than the object's story. That doesn't mean the ark is fiction. It means historians draw a careful line between 2 different things: the ark as a literary and theological symbol, extremely well documented, and the ark as a specific physical object whose full history can be independently verified, which is far harder to establish. To be fair to the other side of this debate,
In a widely cited 1996 article, researcher Lean Rittmeyer used architectural reconstruction of the Temple Mount
to propose an exact spot within the Holy of Holies where the Ark may once have rested, based on a rectangular indentation cut into the bedrock.
It's compelling detective work, but it identifies where the Ark may have sat, not what became of it. And it remains a hypothesis, not a confirmed discovery. With no confirmed physical trail, legend has had nearly 3,000 years to fill in the blanks.
The most famous claim comes from Ethiopia. According to the Kebra Negast, a 14th century Ethiopian epic,
the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon in Jerusalem and had a son by him, named Menelik. When Menelik came of age and traveled to meet his father, Solomon sent him home with an escort of young Israelite nobles. According to the story, those companions, reluctant to leave Jerusalem, secretly took the ark with them, arriving in Ethiopia too late for Solomon to stop them. This story became deeply woven into Ethiopian national identity. The country's Solomonic dynasty, which ruled until 1974, claimed direct descent from Menelik, written directly into the nation's own constitutions in the 20th century.
Here's the detail that should give you chills. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintains that the actual Ark sits today
inside the Church of St. Mary of Zion, in the city of Aksum, watched over by a single guardian monk. That monk, according to tradition, may never leave the grounds again for the rest of his life. No one is permitted to see it, not tourists, not scholars, not even the country's highest-ranking clergy.
It's a moving story, and it clearly matters immensely to millions of people.
It's also fair to note its historical status plainly. Global safety lock. Most scholars today consider the Kebra Negast account apocryphal, a later legend rather than a verified historical record. One more tradition points closer to Jerusalem than Ethiopia does. A sealed chamber beneath the Temple Mount, a site far too politically sensitive for any modern excavation to test.
Neither Aksum nor the Temple Mount has ever been independently confirmed as the Ark's resting place.
But Ethiopia isn't the only tradition claiming a connection to the Ark. The next one comes from a place and a kind of evidence that almost no Ark documentary ever mentions. Nearly 3,000 kilometers south of Ethiopia, a different people tell a strikingly similar story. It's worth being clear from the outset about what this chapter is and isn't. Not a claim about where the Ark ended up, but a case study in how far the same tradition can travel, and what modern science can and can't confirm about it. The Lemba are a Bantu-speaking ethnic group scattered across Zimbabwe and South Africa, numbering somewhere around 80,000 people today. For generations, the Lemba have maintained an oral tradition, setting them apart from their neighbors. Descent from Jewish ancestors who migrated south from a place called Senna. They practice circumcision, avoid pork, slaughter animals according to rules resembling kosher law, and maintain a priestly clan called the Buba, who alone are permitted to handle their most sacred object.
In the late 1990s, geneticist Tudor Parfit set out to test whether that oral tradition had any basis beyond legend.
His research examined the Y chromosome of Lemba men and found the Buba priestly clan carried an elevated frequency of the Cohen modal haplotype, a genetic marker associated with the traditional Jewish priesthood, the Kohanim. That finding doesn't prove the Lemba descend from ancient Israelites specifically.
But it gave the oral tradition a genetic data point that surprised much of the scientific community. The more striking claim involves an object at the center of Lemba religious life, the Ngoma Lungundu. According to tradition, this sacred drum functioned much like the biblical ark, carried on poles by priests, never touched directly.
Capable of striking down anyone who violated its sanctity, and used to guide the Lemba during their migration south and sound on its own before battle. Parfit eventually located a surviving Ngoma Lungundu in a museum in Harare and had it radiocarbon dated.
It was built sometime in the 8th century, a few hundred years old, not 3,000, which rules it out as the original ark.
What it more likely represents is a successor object, Global Safety Lock, a physical vessel built generations later to carry forward a much older tradition and function. Even with that caveat, the parallel is hard to dismiss entirely. A community on a different continent, isolated from Ethiopian and Israelite institutions for centuries, independently maintained a story of a sacred, deadly, portable object central to their identity as a priestly people. Whether that reflects a genuine ancient connection, a much later cultural transmission, or simple coincidence in how sacred objects function across cultures, remains an open question among researchers. What it does show is that the Ark's story didn't stay contained within Israel, Rome, or Arabia. It kept finding new communities willing to carry it forward, in one form or another. Step back and look at the full shape of this story. An object sacred enough to anchor the religious life of ancient Israel. Central to a war story about false gods humiliated in their own temple. Hidden away, according to Jewish tradition, by a king and a prophet who both saw disaster coming. Referenced in Christian scripture as a symbol so significant, it reappears in the final vision of the New Testament, named directly in the Qur'an as the sign confirming a king's legitimacy. Echoed, perhaps, in the sacred drum of a priestly clan in southern Africa who never had contact with any of these textual traditions. 3 major world religions, and at least one more community beyond them. Each shaped the same object into the part of their story that mattered most to them. And none of them able to say with certainty what ultimately became of it. Layer modern archaeology on top of that, and the picture gets even more interesting. It's not just that we don't know where the Ark went. It's that historians are still working out exactly how much of the kingdom described as having built and housed it can be independently confirmed at all. History rarely disappears all at once. Usually it fades, one missing document, one ruined temple, one forgotten generation at a time. The Ark of the Covenant may simply be the greatest example of that process, not a single dramatic vanishing, but 3,000 years of small silences stacking on top of each other, until an object once considered too sacred to look at directly became something no living person has ever seen at all. Nobody has found it. Nobody has proven it destroyed. What we have instead is a paper trail that stops mid-sentence. Global Safety Lock. 3 religious traditions, and at least one more, each carrying a different piece of the story forward.
And a small but growing body of archaeology trying to separate what can be verified from what has simply been believed for a very long time. So here's the question to sit with. If an object this central to so many different peoples can disappear this completely,
what does that tell us about everything else from the ancient world we've accepted without being able to verify? Let us know what you think the Ark's fate actually was, and which of these traditions you find most convincing.